So there's really two parts of that question. One is sort of the coastal part, and one is the ocean part. So what we see, since we're not out in the ocean all the time measuring things, most people, we don't see anything. I mean, well, salmon are here and gone, and we had a crab domoic acid outbreak, we're kidding. So on the ocean side, the things are a little more subtle. We know the ocean's getting slowly warmer, pretty slowly. We know it's getting more acidic. You can't see that, but it's starting to affect oyster hatcheries and coral reefs and anything that makes a shell. A lot of it now is a few isolated studies and now some laboratory studies where we can change the pH of the water and see, wow, these little crabs don't grow as well. There's also a type of organism called a pteropod that's a little plankton. They're also called sea butterflies. And they have a little calcium carbonate shell. And calcium carbonate dissolves in water that's slightly more acidic. And they're what salmon feed on, seabirds, whales. So they're showing their shells dissolve with a pH that's a little lower than today. So those changes are happening, but it's hard to observe. Sort of like saying people drive over the hill and say, where's the sanctuary? Well, it's out there. It's not like Yosemite, you come into the valley. So it's hard for the average person to understand, I think, ocean climate changes. At the shoreline, we're seeing, say, sort of more observable phenomena. And one of the tricky things is, so we have gradually rising sea level. We can see that in the tide gauges, but we don't really see it along the beach. It looks like it did last year and the year before. We have these excuse me, these El Nino periods and storms. Are we going to have more El Ninos with a warmer climate? Not completely sure, but when we do, El Ninos are elevating sea level maybe a foot or two for 2 or 3 months at a time, combining that with this ramp of sea level rise. And then we have these so-called king tides, these really high tides, which come with large waves. That can affect the shoreline. So right now we're sort of in a watch and wait period. We know what's happening, but the average person maybe doesn't see it. They want to believe it, the people that are sort of environmentally conscious, depending on what political party you're in. But now's the time we need to act and start responding, because we've already baked in a certain amount of climate change. We can't take that back. So the more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the warmer it's going to get, the more that's going to go in the ocean, the more acidic, the higher sea level rise. So we're at a point where we can measure these things, but sort of the good thing and the bad thing is it's happening at a modest rate. I was going to say, seriously on the fence about tipping points. We use that a lot. Two things we use, tipping points and the new normal. And I think the point is, we're not at a normal, we're on a ramp. So it's not like sea level is going to stop at something and we're okay, or the ocean acidification is going to stop. It's going to keep going. So the new normal is a little bit deceiving. The other is a tipping point where something's going to happen. And we're not really sure about that. I think it's going to be like when carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere reached 400 parts per million. It was like, oh, well, nothing happened except it crossed an artificial level. Now it's 410. But when we started all this, it was 275. So it's increased significantly. So we're witnessing things in our measurements, but I think it's harder to sort of equate any particular event with climate change, like we had 4 years of drought. Well, that's what we would expect with climate change: hotter, drier, more fire summers, and wetter winters. But it's very difficult to take any one thing and say, yeah, this is because of climate change, although people are now beginning to look and say, well, the probability is this wouldn't have happened this often or this way, so we can say this Hurricane Sandy was sort of 30% climate change related, and this drought was more likely to have occurred with climate change without it. So but I think one is, as a scientist, I'm a little cautious. Yeah, it's all because of climate change, because it's happening and we can measure pieces of it, but things are a little harder. You can say, gee, it froze last week in Washington, so it must not be happening. Well, that's part of the climate. I should say that's part of the weather.